Thought League Season 2.
Hello and welcome to the Thought League, where we present ideas for change in the fast evolving world order. Today we will focus on making India the pharmacy of the world, which requires, remember, research and development, scientific innovation in the healthcare sector. It's not just make in India. Can we strive for innovating that in India as well? To discuss this, we have with us today Kiran Mazumdar, Shroff, Biocon, and Cyril Shroff from Cyril, Amarchand, Mangaldas. Thank you so much for joining us right here on CNBC TV18. Kiran, we discussed this at a very critical juncture when we saw the importance of pharma innovations during the pandemic, and also with a recent deal with Mylan that Biocon has recently struck, which can leapfrog into India into the global biosimilar space. How do you assess India's ranking on scientific innovations being an industry leader?
Thank you, Nisha, for that very important question. I, for one, believe that India needs to move up the value rankings in the global pharmaceutical sector. And whilst we have earned that label of being the pharmacy of the world, on sheer volumes of pharmaceutical products that are being supplied to all parts of the globe, I believe that in terms of value capture, we rank 14th. And that is where we really need to improve our rankings. And to me, this is all about moving from focusing on off-patent drugs to patented drugs. So how do we patent and create value from patented drugs? Which means we need to innovate ourselves into moving up these rankings. I really believe that India has the capabilities, the potential, and the opportunities to innovate our way to the top. And for that, we need to, of course, create an ecosystem that provides gestational funding, that basically provides the regulatory, enablement to take ideas to the market or molecules to the market. And we also need to build credibility as an innovation-led nation.
Right. So those are the critical aspects that we need to still work upon. But Cyril Shroff, we discussed this particular idea with the principal advisor on scientific aspects also to the government of India. And this came out very clearly that the overall ecosystem and the mindset change is also required. Like for infrastructure, we get patient capital. Like in tech, we are going up the value chain. Why not healthcare?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the broader theme here is how do you encourage deep innovation? How do you incentivize deep science? And how do you create the broader ecosystem which combines policy, academics, and markets and industry to make this possible? Because unless it moves on all these fronts, you won't get to the desired result. And there are a number of aspects to it. But first and foremost, I think as Kiran very nicely introduced the subject, I think we need to set our aspiration at the right level. There is a tremendous opportunity in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry in general. Secondly, I think we have the capabilities. And I think what we need to do is to work on the Indian ecosystem across a number of dimensions to make this come alive. It has to become, our reputation as a nation has to become that of innovators. And then when you do that, then capital and entrepreneurship and talent will all find their way to this space. So I think we are sitting on actually a threshold of a tremendous opportunity in the decade ahead.
Right. So set the expectations and aspirations right, and then make it a priority, and everything else will fall in place. Now, Kiran, as from Biocon, you made an attempt so that India leapfrogs and joins the global arena in the biosimilar space with your Mylan deal. What is the opportunity that we are looking at capturing there?
So, Nisha, let me start by saying that when I actually embarked on this mission of really developing biosimilars for global markets, it was at a time when the biosimilar guidelines had not even been formed in the markets we were targeting, which is really the US and European markets, which are the high value markets. We simply followed the science. We felt that following the science would actually help us to possibly align with the guidelines, and we were right. So that's how we became early movers in biosimilar development. And I'm glad that we had many firsts to celebrate, because many of our biosimilars were the first to be approved by US FDA, including the first interchangeable insulin glargine. So I think India has the ability to invest and pursue deep science, and follow the science is really what will lead us into innovation. So as Cyril said, how do we basically invest in deep science? And that's what we did in biosimilars. That's what we can do in innovative areas. The other aspect I want to also talk about is scale. I think we focused on scale. If you want to build credibility, you have to have global leadership. And for global leadership, you need to have global scale. That's what we really invested in. And of course, this recent, announcement we've made about about acquiring Viatris's, biosimilars business that we've partnered with them for over a decade is a very exciting opportunity for us to actually be able to create the world's largest biosimilars company. So of course, there's a lot to be done, but I think the basic confidence that we have emanates from the fact that we've actually been able to develop a very large portfolio of biosimilars. And I think we possibly have and will have the deepest and broadest portfolio of biosimilars for over the next 10 years. That is what I think Indian companies ought to also look at, that in whatever they do, it is about global scale. And investing in creating global scale, investing in R&D, and being very R&D focused and R&D led.
Right. But Kiran, what stops most of the disruptors to come in this space, or from the promoter community? How can more promoters and companies be energized on this path?
So, the biggest challenge we have, Nisha, and I'm sure Cyril will also agree with me, is the fact that markets and investors want low risk and high return. And unfortunately, the pharmaceutical space, especially the innovation-led pharmaceutical space, like for instance, biosimilars, is a fairly high-risk space to invest in, and a long gestation that is involved in taking the molecules to the market.
Right.
And when you start getting into very innovative products, which are really IP-driven, patent-driven kind of molecules, it takes even longer. So right. I think we need to create an ecosystem in India that actually enables financing these kind of big bets and regulatory enablement that allows you to fast track some of these lab to market journeys. I think that's what we need to really focus on. And of course, we need to ensure that investors and markets are ready to support, as you called it, this patient capital, so that we can put India on the map of the world. Without these investments, India will always remain a follower. India will always remain a pharmaceutical industry that focuses on off-patent drugs, because these are low risk, these are predictable, and they do provide much quicker returns.
Yes, that's right. And Cyril, Shroff, Kiran made some very important points. Now, during the pandemic especially, and the thrust towards sustainability has shown us the importance of healthcare, and on the other hand, investing in the future, which is there for sustainable growth over a long haul as well. How can government really push? Because it's actually a national subject that we need to be ahead and self-sufficient when it comes to healthcare, especially in crisis situations.
So, building on what Kiran said, I'd like to sort of go back to a more broader topic, which is of how do you create the right environment in the country for innovation and sort of a more scientific approach to things. So Going back to the theme of innovation, so there is a lot that the government could, and from a policy point of view, do to encourage innovation and research. If we can have production-linked incentives, why can't we have research-linked incentives? And that conversation has been going on for a long time. So there is a clear steer that the government can give on this. Then secondly, I think we need to think about the R&D subject more broadly. Why can't we have more R&D grants? There is also not enough private investment that is being made in R&D when you compare it with Western markets. And Western capital providers, I think personally, maybe I can say it have a slightly double standards for the West, and then when you compare them for Asian markets, because probably they don't trust developing markets as much as they do the other markets. So how do we create that equilibrium by which they feel as comfortable? And that comes back to the policy question. So there is a big role for the state to play.
Yes.
I think there is a big role for industry to play. And I think there is also a big role for the academic community and universities to play as well. All these three combined can create a very, as they call it, the triple helix method of innovation. If you are able to create that, that is when actually there will be almost like a eureka moment when you will find capital flowing in, as well as innovation will move very fast. And as Kiran said, moving away from off patents to actually how do you create IP and how do you create new patents.
Right, taking off from what Cyril Shroff rightly mentioned about creating the overall ecosystem where all the stakeholders and participants come together for that one goal. Kiran, very immediately, what are the few things that the government can fix to give an immediate push and thrust in this direction? And do you think that Indian regulations as well as international regulations are aligned on the healthcare space?
So let me first, pick up a very important point that, Cyril referred to, and that is the research-linked incentives. I've been batting for research-linked incentives for a long time. And the reason we need to do that is because unless we increase investment in R&D, we are not going to pursue, a patented or IP-driven R&D in a big way. And we need to do that very fast. So I think research-linked incentives need to encourage companies to move from below 5% of revenue spend on R&D to over 10% of revenue spend on R&D. So I just think that the way you have to do it is to give fiscal incentives. Without that, it's not going to happen. And I think the fiscal incentives are very, very simple. And I think they can really incentivize companies to invest in IP-driven R&D. For instance, we have suggested to the government that they bring back the 200% weighted tax deduction on R&D expenses with the caveat that it is plowed back into IP-driven R&D. Yes. The second suggestion is that we create a patent box regime, which means that any commercial income derived from patented products or drugs ought to be given a 10-year tax holiday or a lower tax, like say a 10% tax for 10 years. And the third, which is a very simple ask, is that if the government has already instituted a 15% corporate tax on new manufacturing, capital linked to new manufacturing, initiatives, then why can't we actually bring companies that are beginning to spend over 10% of their revenues on R&D into the same corporate bracket of 15%? I think this will drive companies to invest into IP-driven innovation. That is one thing that I really want to see happen.
All right.
The second question you asked me was about regulations, whether they are harmonized and aligned. I certainly believe that at a very broad level, we are harmonized with most of the advanced market regulations. In fact, in many respects, we are actually trying to, leapfrog and fast track into new areas where our regulations will become very enabling, such as cell and gene therapy, such as rare diseases, I think, and genomic health in general. I think these are very exciting new areas. And if we've sort of lagged behind in the conventional innovative spaces, I think there is an opportunity for us to leapfrog into these new areas.
All right, Kiran, very, very emphatically made point there about government incentivizing innovation in the healthcare space. But capital still remains the lifeline. So hold on to your thoughts. We'll come back on the Thought League and discuss the lifeline and the infrastructure support behind the R&D and scientific innovations and what can be done there. Stay tuned to the Thought League. Welcome back. You're watching the Thought League and we are discussing the ideas for making India the pharmacy of the world. Kiran Mazumdar Shaw as well as Cyril Shroff are right here on CNBC TV18. Now, Cyril Shroff, we've discussed the regulatory aspects, but legal aspects also play a very important role in the healthcare space. What needs to change there? Is there an overhaul required?
Absolutely. And I think this is the underlying issue which finally has an impact on the quality and the quantum of capital that is coming in. Because if I can use the word ease of doing business, related aspects in relation to this industry were smoother and clearer with more transparency, then you'll create a much better environment to attract capital. We have the basic legislation is of the 1940s. The regulations have very slow pathways for getting to approval. There are very unique quirks in India if the innovation is made in India, which you don't find in other markets of the world. So there are several disincentives for taking, for the not only for the R&D, but then taking it to market. And all of that can be fixed quite quickly by the policymaker. So unless you solve that fundamental problem of regulation, policy, the pathways to approval, the kind of penalties or, the consequences that follow, you will not create that environment where capital will find, and the companies will stay over here. Otherwise, the companies go abroad and seek to access different markets and different providers of capital, whether it is venture capital or whether it is private equity or whether it is public markets. So you have to fix the underlying legal and policy problem first.
Oh, very well pointed out, Cyril Shroff over there. So, Kiran Mazumdar Shaw, what can be done to attract the capital? What are the changes required? And why is it that the loss-making startups still attracted capital, but as you said, long-haul, high-risk R&D is not?
Well, I think first and foremost, the regulations which, apply to pharmaceuticals is far more complex and far more gestational in terms of taking an idea to the market or a molecule to the market compared to the digital tech space, okay? The tech space has far fewer regulations. So if it's a smart idea, converting that idea and taking it to the market, the journey is much shorter. So I think investors and markets like to have a very good and simple understanding of time to market. And that seems to be the case when it comes to the tech sector. But when it comes to the biotech or the pharma sector, I think the risk is much higher, the uncertainty is much higher, and the regulations are far too complex. Right. And that's what basically deters people from investing in this sector. And that's why in most countries, especially in the US, the government plays a very important role in providing that risk capital at the early, proof of concept stage, which also BIRAC and many other, institutions like DST and others are playing, even in the case of our sector. But of course, the pie is much smaller for Indian companies than, say, for the Western, companies. Having said that, I think what we are not seeing is the follow-on investment that other companies get in the West from venture capital compared to India.
Yes.
Venture capital is simply not chasing these high-risk ideas in India. They're chasing exciting, low-risk ideas in the tech space. I think the big challenge we have is how do we make sure that venture capital chases the very innovative ideas in pharma biotech? That is really the big challenge.
So, Kiran, you have such a strong hold in Bengaluru. That's where everybody is based. I'm sure you can create that ecosystem there and, stop the companies from developing here and flipping to overseas lands then.
Yeah, in fact, I was coming to that, Nisha. The big challenge we have today is that there's a lot of innovation happening in India. But unfortunately, all these startups are flipping their companies into the Western Hemisphere or to even Singapore and other kind of VC enabled destinations where they're able to raise that capital for the same idea. Yes. So I just think we need to make sure that those same ideas must be backed in India instead of flipping it to other regions where they seem to be able to attract funding.
Right.
So we need to understand and diagnose why that is happening.
That's right. And as Cyril Shroff also had pointed out, some of the legal regulatory aspects also need a little more clarity and change so that it can comfort these investors as well, right? So Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, Cyril Shroff, thank you so much. It was a very interesting discussion and many, many important points came out on how to fix this particular problem and make India the pharmacy of the world. Thank you so much for all the insights. So we have all the ingredients, but a big push will come from the investor support to see scientific breakthrough, and that needs to be seen as a critical subject for India as a country as well. With that, it's a wrap on the Thought League. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League.